Okay, year 13. I'm going to talk you through quickly now a little film on how do you comment on literary theory, which is obviously something that you need to do for your Marxism or feminism essays. And it'll particularly hit criteria such as perceptive consideration of different interpretations of texts. Okay, that's really what it's about in terms of offering feminist or Marxist perspectives. How might they interpret the text that we read? Okay, how might you know about Marxist or feminist perspectives? Well, the best place to get your information about that is the critical anthology. Really important that you go back and read those articles again when you decided on your title. Look at the summaries you wrote of them and pore over them. Really concentrate on them to find which bits of this are relevant to my title, which bits of this apply to my title. Because I suppose my central point here is going to be that it's not just about understanding Marxism and feminism, it's about applying it in a way which fits with what you're trying to say. Okay, helpful phrases include things like a Marxist critic may argue that, from a Marxist perspective it could be argued that. You see how you're trying to suggest an interpretation here. You're not saying this is definitely true. You're just saying if you were a Marxist critic, you might think this about the text. Okay, a typical Marxist interpretation might be, okay, if you're going to actually reference the articles, which you're quite welcome to do, it's doing it like this. In Literary Theory, the Basics, 2001, Hans Burtons, is the writer, suggests that blah 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 blah. Okay, I'll show you a model in a minute. A Marxist critic may foreground the importance of the Marxist concept of reification or whatever is useful to consider here because, or sheds light on this point because. So they're the sorts of phrases that are useful to help bring in Marxist references and make sure you're covering that assessment objective of different interpretations. Examples, okay, so I imagine if you're writing about Harrison, okay, so if you're writing about silencing with Harrison, the point is that you want to avoid just saying Marxists think that the ruling class oppress the proletariat. Okay, you don't want to have that very basic understanding of Marxism because it doesn't actually address the idea of silencing. Okay, you're going to think about how does this work in your context of your essay. So if you're writing about silencing, what about? Whilst a Marxist critic may argue that Harrison is commenting on the silencing of the working classes as a whole, I'm thinking about them and us here. Okay, so a Marxist might say, yeah, this is about class oppression. This is about the teacher representing the bourgeoisie, the ruling classes, oppressing the working classes as represented by Harrison. Okay, it may be that the poem provides a more personal comment on one man's personal experience. Just notice I've used personal twice there, which I don't need to, do I? I could take one of those personals out. That's an example of redundancy, i.e. using two words or repeating a word when you just don't need to. It provides a more personal comment on one man's experience. So can you see how that's taking a Marxist idea about working class oppression, but it's thinking how does that relate in the context of this essay? So it's saying, yeah, I can see what a Marxist might mean there. However, you could argue it's just Harrison writing about himself. Maybe he's not writing about working class experience as a whole. Okay, and you could debate that. You could argue for and against that. Another argument, I'm again thinking about them and us, and this point about is it ongoing? Is the oppression ongoing, or does Harrison seem to win? Does he seem to liberate himself and find freedom in the second half of the poem? You might include a comment like this. Whilst the tone and content here may suggest that Harrison has achieved freedom over his ruling class oppressors, so he has achieved freedom. So it looks like an essay about liberty, or is it ongoing, or something like that. A Marxist critic may disagree. Hans Burton, for example, suggests that for Marxists, minds aren't free at all. They only think they are. And this is the footnote reference here. Okay, so this is the fourth reference I've used, so therefore I've used it as a footnote. Applying this to them and us would imply that, and then I talk about how, okay, so for a Marxist, whilst Harrison might appear triumphal in the second half of the poem, he might suggest that yes, this can be achieved, that working class people can liberate themselves. To a Marxist, he's not really free at all. He's just contributing further to the superstructure of the state, and it's impossible for him to achieve genuine freedom whilst capitalism exists. Okay, so you'd then make that point here. I mean, Harrison himself seems to recognise that with the reference to the Times, doesn't he? So whilst he has this kind of celebratory, triumphant tone to the second half of the poem, he does undercut it with this reference to the Times and how his identity is taken by it. So there we are. I mean, how to do it well? You need to try and show a more sophisticated understanding of the theories. So that comes from reading the articles carefully and thinking deeply about them in relation to your text and your title. Okay, and using the theories in a way which support your argument, not just chucking a paragraph of Marxism in the opening or in the conclusion. How would a Marxist perspective help you to answer your question? And it's got that strong sense of debate. A Marxist might suggest that, however, the strengths and weaknesses of that view may be. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. We'll cover it in class as well, but have a think about it from that point of view.